In the famous Chris dance, warriors under the spell of one spirit try to kill themselves with their curved daggers while being protected by the powers of another spirit. The dances range from beautiful and delicate to mysterious and spectacular. Sumatra is responsible for much of the mineral wealth of Indonesia, with large oil fields and mining operations scattered throughout the island. Subsistence farms account for the majority of the agriculture on Sumatra. Numbers of families have moved there from the more crowded areas of Java. These so-called transmigration farmers work small 2 to 5 acre plots provided by the government. Northern Sumatra is home to the Acehnese and the Batak people, 2 of the major tribal groups found in Indonesia. Over 100 million of Indonesia's 190 million people live on the island of Java. With a little over 51,000 square miles, the population density on Java is more than 38 times that of the U.S. To get a better idea of this, imagine squeezing the population of all the states east of the Mississippi into an area the size of Alabama. Jakarta, the capital, is a modern city of around 10 million people. It is the commercial and cultural hub of the nation, as well as a major financial center for much of Southeast Asia. Known as Batavia during colonial times, there remains evidence today of early Dutch influence in the architecture and in old Dutch Reformed churches. But usually the modern face of Indonesia outstrips the old. An example is the Istiqlal Mosque in Jakarta. Reported to hold 15,000 of the faithful during Friday prayers, it's the largest mosque in Asia. Bandung, in the mountains to the east, is known for its tea plantations. The area surrounding Bandung is also home to a large number of the 30 million Sundanese people who live in West Java. The second largest city in Indonesia is Surabaya on the east coast of Java. Most urban dwellers live in small communities called kampungs. Their lives are often lived out near polluted rivers and canals that provide water for bathing and cooking, as well as sewage facilities. Clean water is a problem for most Indonesians. Located in central Java is the city of Surakarta, also known as Solo. It is here that the beautiful Indonesian batik fabrics are made. From early man and volcanic eruptions to Dutch settlers and political reform, the pages of Indonesian history are a chronicle of growth, transition, and change. On Christmas Day, 1951, another chapter was added to that history, the arrival of the first Southern Baptist missionaries, We'll tell you about that when we return. Welcome back to Indonesia. We're in West Java, in one of the country's largest cities, Bandung. Population more than 2 million people. Bandung is also site of the first church established by Southern Baptist missionaries in this country. Built as an English language church, it now ministers to more than 450 members with services in English and Indonesian. But the story of this church and Baptist work throughout Indonesia has its roots several thousand miles away in China. It was 1950, and Baptist missionaries in China were caught up in a violent communist takeover. A year before, the nationalist government, pursued by the armies of Mao Zedong, had fled the mainland for the neighboring island of Taiwan. Then came the numbing word that missionary Bill Wallace, a medical doctor in Wu Chao, had been arrested by the communist government, accused of being a spy. Wallace would later die in prison. For 3 missionary families from China, leaving had been a painful decision, but a new mission field would soon replace their beloved China. Buren Johnson, Charles Coward, and Stockwell Sears came to recognize the newly formed Republic of Indonesia as having vast potential for gospel witness. Here was a land with a population as large as all the other Baptist fields in Southeast Asia combined, and new freedoms for religion that had been denied during the Dutch colonial period. So leaving their wives and families for a time in the U.S., the 3 arrived in Jakarta on Christmas Day, 1951. Unable to find long-term housing in the capital, they traveled by train to the city of Bandung, and there began to lay the foundation for Baptist work in Indonesia.
We felt maybe we ought to start off by dividing. Instead of all going to one place, uniting our work, we would divide as fast as possible. We'd start work in the city of Bandung, which is in the mountains, and the city of Bandung seemed ideally situated for Charles Coward, Miriam Coward, and their son, Billy. The senior member of our trio was Buren Johnson. He was the business manager, to be the treasurer. We felt the ideal place would be located in the capital and in the business center, Jakarta. Darlene and I were going to go to the second largest city, Surabaya. The strategy was to hit the main centers and work out from there.
We felt that China was a lifetime career, and then that was broken. But God always opens one door when he closes another, and we felt this was an open door when Dr. Coughlin wrote to us about it. And there were about 2 million Chinese living in Indonesia, so we felt that what we had invested in language study and in learning to know the Chinese people would be useful to us, even in a Muslim country in a new situation.
Missionary William McElrath has become the unofficial historian for the Indonesia mission.
Actually, they found out that the approach of coming in with the overseas Chinese was a self-limiting approach. For one thing, you know, there are many kinds of Chinese spoken, and there were some places they could be understood in Chinese and some they couldn't. They found that English was a drawing card, and actually this church right here in Bandung was started as an English language ministry.
Although souls were being won to Christ in the English and Chinese languages, the potential of this new land wasn't being tapped. In those early years, a young missionary, still in language school, emphasized the importance of reaching out in the language of the people.
He was asked to pastor this first Baptist congregation here which was basically still an English language work. That's why he could do it when he didn't know that much Indonesian. And he was the one who led them to first start thinking seriously about how limiting an approach was of using a foreign language in a church, whether it was English or Chinese or whatever. He encouraged them to realize that they needed to start having Bible study and worship services in the national language, Indonesian, if they were to reach more people.
The young missionary was R. Keith Parks, and this emphasis on working in the heart language of the people was continued as a primary directive for all Southern Baptist missionaries during his term as Foreign Mission Board president. By the end of 1952, additional workers had arrived, many of them also from China. The strategy they followed was that which had been so successful in their former mission field.
We knew about Baptist churches here, we knew about Baptist churches in China, and we did the only thing we knew how to do, believing that in about 3 or 4 years, a church would be started, a church that would be strong and self-supporting to a large degree, but those early churches were dependent upon the mission board to help with the building and buying of land.
The early work included not only churches, but theological education and medical work as well.
One of the first missionaries appointed specifically for Indonesia was Kathleen Jones, a doctor. They felt there was a need for a medical work, tried to consult with the Indonesian government health department, and settled on Kediri in East Java.
Kediri was a long way from the major cities where the rest of the Baptist work was centered, but Jones, along with nurses Everly Hayes and Ruth Ford, were determined to succeed. Construction began, and the women went out into the villages to try and win support for the clinic. A local leader told them that 3 foreign women in the predominantly Muslim area would find few people willing to come for medical treatment. When they looked for a file cabinet to hold patient registration cards, they were told that a shoebox would be big enough. Little did the women realize that they were establishing what would come to be one of the foremost medical centers in all of Indonesia, with patient records numbering in the tens of thousands. Another area of concern for the young mission was the lack of printed materials to use in the churches.
We had no Sunday school literature. When we started having Sunday school, we had to crank out on our old mimeograph in the garage copies.
Darlene Sears and the little elves in her workshop used to crank a mimeograph machine out in the garage. That was where our publishing ministry here got started. And then it was moved here to Bandung. The first missionary assigned full-time to publication work was the late Grace Wells, who was another old China hand. And for a while, the work was so small here that Grace would shove everything under the bed at the place where she lived at night. But it grew.